The day my husband took me for a pregnancy checkup, he got a call from his old flame. Just a simple "I miss you," and he left me standing on the curb without a second thought. I expected to lose it, to yell and scream at him, but I didn't. I just stayed quiet and calmly booked an appointment for an abortion the next day. But when my husband found out, he completely lost it, practically shoving his beloved out of his arms, begging me in tears to forget him. Today was supposed to be the day Chris Blanchard, my husband, took me to the hospital for a pregnancy checkup. Halfway there, his old love, Fern Robbins, called to tell him her son had a high fever. Without any explanation, he told me, his 3-month-old pregnant wife, to get out of the car and drove straight to Fern's house, which was in the opposite direction. He left me stranded on a deserted road. The heavy snow that night had turned everything into an icy mess and I slipped and fell. Pain shot through my stomach like 100 needles stabbing at once. A kind stranger found me and drove me to the hospital. I was so glad to hear the doctor said my baby was fine. After the checkup, I kept calling Chris, hoping he'd come pick me up, but he never answered. Call after call went to voicemail or a busy signal. But when Fern called him, he picked up right away. It reminded me of how things were before we got married. His phone was always on, always waiting for my call. I went home, my heart heavy, and just collapsed on the bed. Chris came back around 1 and Oiden muttering under his breath as he walked in. "You went to bed already? You didn't even leave the light on for me." I used to wait for him no matter how late he came home. And if I fell asleep, I'd leave the bedside lamp on. But tonight, I just didn't have it in me to care. I turned over, facing away from him, and leave his questions on air. He clicked his tongue in irritation. "Are you serious right now? Fern's son had a 102-degree fever. If I hadn't taken them to the hospital, he could have ended up with brain damage. Show a little compassion, would you? Did you think about me at all when you left me on the curb in the middle of a snowstorm? Did you even care if I managed to get to the hospital or not? I'm pregnant, for heaven's sake, with our baby," I snapped. "Who's your wife, Chris? Is Fern so incapable that she can't call 911 on her own? Why does she have to ask someone else's husband to deal with her problem?" I kept going. Chris let out a long, exasperated sigh, looking at me like I was losing hold. "Don't be so petty, Elodie. Fern's just returned from England. Her British husband divorced her and she doesn't have anyone else here. I'm the only person she knows. Things hasn't been easy for her. Raising a kid alone is draining. If there's something I can do to help her, then I had to." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Then why don't you just divorce me and go be with her? That's what you want, right?" The more I talked, the more my heart hurt. I remembered the days before we got married. The Chris I used to know would put me first in everything. When I had even a slight cold, he'd be frantic, rushing me to the hospital, ignoring urgent calls from his boss in the process. But now, he was like a stranger, indifferent and distant. Maybe he saw the heartbreak on my face because he softened a little, stepping closer and wrapping me in his arms. "Come on, don't be mad, honey. Forgive me this one time. I swear I'll never do it again," he said softly, trying to soothe me. One of his hands slipped under my collar while his lips brushing against my neck. "I've missed you. It's been a while since we've done it." I slapped his hand away hard. "What do you mean, a while? We just did it last month. The doctor warned me, no more sex until after the baby's born, or I could miscarry." All right, Chris muttered, clearly frustrated as he let me go. He grabbed his phone and whatever he saw made his whole face light up. His eyes went soft and gentle and he looked completely absorbed. I called his name, but he wasn't answering. It was like he didn't even hear me. While he was in the shower, I picked up his phone from the bedside table. To my surprise, he had changed the lock screen password. It used to be my birthday. After several failed attempts, I tried entering 1123 and it worked. November 23rd was the day his precious Fern Robbins returned from England after her divorce. I couldn't help but scoff as I unlocked Chris's phone, immediately seeing their message history. Fern's words dripped with sweetness, her constant calling on my husband was getting on my nerves. "Fern, Chris, thank you so much for today. I don't know what I would have done without you. If only you were Tony's dad. Chris, if you don't mind, let Tony call me dad. I actually quite like it." Topped with smiley face. My heart sank, my whole body going numb. It felt like all the blood in my veins froze solid. Just then, a notification popped up, another message from Fern. It was a voice message, just 2 seconds long. I hit play. A young boy's voice chirped, "Thank you, Daddy Chris." I couldn't help but laugh, though it was the kind that laced with bitterness. Here I was, carrying Chris's child and he was off playing father to another woman's son. I could still remember his promises from our wedding night, the vows to love me forever, to be loyal, to cherish only me. It had barely been 3 years and those promises had rusted over. Chris stepped out of the shower, catching sight of me with his phone. His face contorted with rage and he shoved me hard enough that I crashed to the floor. Pain shot through my belly and I had to grit my teeth against it. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Ever heard of privacy?" I stumbled and hit the floor, feeling a sharp pain in my stomach. I gritted my teeth against the pain. "Privacy? What about boundaries?" I spat, struggling to get back up. "You're letting Fern's kid call you dad. What does that make our baby?" "Oh come on, it's just a godfather thing. Why do you have to make everything a big deal?" he said coldly. He didn't even bother to help me up, staring down at me with annoyance, his brows furrowed. "It's not like I'm leading you to marry Fern. Isn't that enough for you?" His words stung. My thoughts flashed back to 3 years ago when he proposed. He had looked at me with eyes full of warmth back then, his words sweet enough to make bees swarm. But now he couldn't even look at me without disdain, as if I was something he wished he could scrape off his shoe. Just as I was about to respond, his phone rang. I glanced at the screen. He had saved Fern's contact under a ridiculously affectionate nickname, Fernie. He picked up immediately, completely unbothered by my presence. "Hey, Chris," Fern's voice word from the other end. "Sorry to bother you again, but Tony's been fussy all night. He says he misses his daddy Chris and wants you to come and read him a bedtime story." Chris's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. He didn't hesitate for a second. AWW, isn't he a cute boy? Well, I can't let him down, can I? Alright, I'll be right there. Wait for me, Tony. Daddy's on the way. Chris, I called out, my voice trembling as he headed for the door, practically begging. Please don't go. Stay here with me. I sprained my ankle when you pushed me. It was true, my ankle throbbed with every slight movement, the pain shooting out my leg like needles. But Chris just looked at me, eyes full of disdain. Seriously, I barely pushed you, Elodie. Stop being so dramatic. He shrugged on a fresh jacket, even taking the time to fix his hair in the mirror and then turned to leave. I could feel my anger boiling over. Chris, if you walk out that door tonight, we're getting a divorce. Divorce? Chris chuckled dismissively. Don't be ridiculous. You really want our child to grow up fatherless? He paused, turning to look at me. When he saw determination on my face expression, he shook his head in disbelief. Unbelievable. He walked over, scooping me up and dropping me on the bed like he was doing me a favor. There, alright, just stay in bed and rest. You'll be fine by morning. I said nothing, watching him leave. Once he was gone, I pulled out my phone and scheduled an abortion for the next day. I couldn't do this anymore. I had to take control of my own life. Ignoring the pain in my ankle, I hobbled to the freezer, grabbed a washcloth and chilled it until it was cold enough to use as a makeshift ice pack. I pressed it against my swollen ankle, tears streaming down my face. If you wouldn't take care of me, then I'd take care of myself. I didn't sleep a wink that night. It wasn't like I was waiting for him. I just couldn't. But just like what I had in mind, Chris didn't come home. Just as the sky began to lighten, a message from an unknown number came in. There were several photos, all of Chris. He was shirtless, love bites clearly visible on his neck, holding around a 5-year-old boy in his arms. The boy clutched the picture book while Chris read to him, his face gentle and relaxed, the very image of a doting father. I didn't mean to ask who had sent the pictures. A moment later, a message came through.